Everybody in the back row hear me okay? Good deal. Can't hear up here though. I've got that problem also. Well, it's good to be with you this evening. I'll tell sort of how I ended up here, I believe. It isn't just because I married a redheaded Minnesota Icelander. It was because many years ago I had a resident at the University of Missouri who was considering doing academic medicine after her training. And I was doing a number of articles on wounding at that time, and she became involved in that and ended up at the Mayo Complex. And her mother is here, mother-in-law, this evening, but she is not, because I had two choices about which day to come and talk here, and I picked the last, and then Gina Chatfield at that time, said, well, we're going to be in China and we'll miss you. So I'm missing Gina tonight, so I'll have to come back and talk another time. The topic is going to be those who serve. First off, has anybody in the audience served the nation in uniform previously, in the past? Any veterans here? So probably a third of the group. I know we have one airborne guy. Any other airborne guys here other than Mike I met? Any other guys foolish enough to jump out of a plane? No, just Mike and me. Okay. Any Marines? So I can tell Marine jokes. Any Army Rangers? Oh, good. This is going to be a good crowd if I jump into those jokes. Well, the units that I served with, airborne units, are those units in the center of that PowerPoint presentation on the bottom. I served with each one of those. The one with the bayonet and the lightning bolts to it is the 3rd Group Army Special Forces, and I served with that unit in the Gulf War. And my oldest brother was also a Special Forces soldier, and he served with that very same unit in Vietnam. Vicki, mentioning those who serve and thanking all of you who have served in the past, I also need to recognize that it's not just the soldier, the airman, Marine, Coast Guardman, sailor that served, but it is often their spouses and families because they are often alone. My daughter married a Marine. They were in the Marine Corps for 22 years. I thought that she would have probably been wiser than that and had lived through enough of it that she wouldn't have done that, but she absolutely loved being on the military installation. So with that, I'm going to go to the second slide. And is somebody, or am I power doing the, okay, they're going to bring me a, and do I point it at that stuff over there?
So there's a red light.
Okay.
Or you can just
Advance, okay, and do I have to, okay, right there's going to do it? So far, no. Let's try that. There we go.
Okay.
I have to point at the machine, is that right, Eric? In the corner? Okay. Those who serve, the introduction, those are the Eagle Series books. The first one was on leadership, the second one, Courage, Medal of Honor, the third, Hope, Prisoners of War, the fourth, Faith. The history of the Eagle Series books. In 1996, I was asked to address the commencement at the University of Missouri to all cadets and midshipmen who were graduating, and I thought, you know, I can talk to you about leadership. I can tell you some jokes that will make you laugh. I can tell you some stories that would even make you cry. I remember when I was a lieutenant all the way through the ranks to a colonel, but if it were me and I was receiving advice for life, who would I want to hear from? And I thought, you know, I'd like to hear from Medal of Honor recipients, our nation's very highest award. I'd like to hear from some truly brave men. And then I thought I'd like to hear from some admirals and generals, because maybe some of these young men and women will become an admiral or a general. And then I thought I'd like to hear from those who endured more for freedom than any other group, prisoners of war. And then I thought I'd also like to hear from a few politicians, and that's bold type now, bold type and underline. I'd like to hear from a few, just a few politicians. I'm about worn out with politicians by this time already. And then I thought I'd like to also take some leaders in religion. So I wrote 40 individuals before I did that talk. I had a year to prepare that talk. And 35 men wrote back. Billy Graham, President Bush, Norm Schwarzkopf, Colin Powell. So I collected that advice. I gave the speech at the University of Missouri, and that speech became so popular with the quotes from it that I thought, I could put that in the form of a book. And that's what, in fact, happened. For the next 3 years after that speech, I worked on A Gathering of Eagles. The first Gathering of Eagles had 227 men from 5 categories giving their wisdom for life on leadership. When I finished that first book, Vicki said to me, there's one thing I want you to promise me. And what I want you to promise me is you will never, ever do anything like that again. And I said, you're absolutely right. I will never, ever do anything that foolish again. But I went to the Medal of Honor Society that year, and a lot of the men saw the book that was first done. They said, would you do a second book, a second edition of this book? We'd like to be in it. And then later that year, I went to the POW meeting, National POW meeting, and they said, would you do a second book? And so I thought, well, I better not tell Vicki, but I decided to do that. And so the second book, which is that one, the second edition of A Gathering of Eagles, came out, and we went from 227 to 345 men. Now, the following year, I went to the Medal of Honor Society meeting again. They said, we'd like to have our own book. And then the Southern Baptists got up with me, and they said, well, some of these men have a faith, and we'd like to know who they are, and we'd like to create a DVD. And so that all evolved and happened. And then I went to the POW meeting, and they said, well, you did one for the Medal of Honor Society. Would you now do one for the American Ex-Prisoner of War Association? So the third book came into effect. Okay. And then the fourth book, the faith book, came after that. I went to a series of books, and I'm going to digress for a moment and tell you a little bit about my past and the way I generally almost always introduce myself. In fact, Vicki was probably wondering what happened to this introduction. I'll often say, only to the men in the group, this is not to the ladies, only to the men. I've had 5 biopsies. I've had 4 major surgeries. I've had 2 months of radiation therapy twice. And I've had 2 months of chemotherapy over a 30-year period to make me this ugly. And then to the guys in the group, I say, now, what is your excuse? I have some of that too. So anyway, after I'd done the third book, I thought, I passed on wisdom for leadership and courage and hope to the military. I want to pass on some wisdom in faith to their children. And so we did the children's series, because at that time I had developed another tumor, and they were talking about removing my tongue. And they decided not to do that, but to do radiation therapy, which is unheard of, twice to the same area. And so that's been 7 years now, I guess. So with that, the faith series came in. I'm going to then move to that's the History of the Eagle series book and the Education Foundation. I felt like when I first started this that it would be unfair for me to take some of the wisdom of other people and tell other people about their wisdom for life, and then for me to take the money that I made from the books and use it for myself. So we gave all of the money away, and still do. All of the money that comes in for the sale of these books goes to the Education Foundation for scholarships, sending kids to school. Over the last 2 or 3 years, all of the money that comes into the foundation is spent to repurchase books to send to our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. because they often need advice on leadership, courage, hope, and yes, faith. When we set up the Education Foundation, many of the men in the Medal of Honor Society liked the idea so much, and I would go back each year and tell them that they signed a number of these photographs, 8x10 photographs. The photo on your left is the Army Medal of Honor. The photograph on your right is the Marine Corps Navy Medal of Honor. And the Eagle, that's the Eagle Series books, is signed by Medal of Honor recipients. So when people purchase a case of books to send to Afghanistan or Iraq, which is about $500, I give them one of those photographs. Okay, advice for life from some of the individuals, just a sentence or two. Desmond Doss. And I did not mention, but Vicki and I are with the Military Ministry of Campus Crusade. And so periodically something I'll say will ring of faith. Yeah, I have a faith. Having cancer, I guess 4 times, can give you faith. It can drive you to it. Desmond Doss, one of my very favorite Medal of Honor recipients. And the reason, I guess, is he was a combat medic, as I was a combat medic. People will ask me, Doc, did you carry a weapon as a medic in Special Forces? I said, you bet I carried a weapon. I had a .45 underneath my blouse, and I had a 9mm in the back of my belt, and I had an M16, I had bayonets, and I had combat knives. I even had a machete. I don't know if it was all directly proportional to my fear or not, but Desmond Doss, a conscientious objector, refused to touch a weapon, let alone carry a weapon, and I cannot comprehend how anyone can go into combat without a weapon. But Desmond Doss did. Received the Medal of Honor, and just time after time after time, the things he did, it's in the Valor book, and it's in fact, it's in the Valor book and the Faith book, those who serve. So Desmond Doss's advice for life, and I may or may not, depending on the time later, address more of his information, but right now I'm going to give you the last sentence of his quote. A quote for everybody, a quote to use. I even wear this quote in a bracelet on my right wrist. It's this: if we miss heaven, we have missed everything. If you miss it, if I miss it, if we miss it, we've missed everything. Heaven. General Lawrence Schwarzkopf, give me one moment. Radiation twice to your face and jaw, and having people wander around in your mouth. An ENT surgeon told me about a year ago, he said, I do not even understand why you can talk, why you can still talk. Lawrence Schwarzkopf would offer this advice to you tonight if you were able to. He would say, success is not what you gain for yourself, it's what you do for other people. Success, not what you do for yourself or gain for yourself, it's what you do for other people. If I unpack that with that, would mean success isn't really about earned degrees. It isn't about your bank account. It isn't even about a 3-car garage with a John Deere tractor in the 3rd stall. But we as Americans, we equate success differently. But Lawrence Schwarzkopf, a very influential fellow who went to the rank of 4-star general, retired from the military, in fact would say it's what we do for other people. That's what's important. Roger Ingvaldson, a Minnesota boy. I have 2 Minnesota boys I'm going to quote tonight. A POW in Vietnam. He grew up in Austin, Minnesota, which is just, I think, about 40 miles from here. Another fellow grew up in Kenyon, and I'll catch him in a moment. Roger Ingvaldson would say this: Success is secular, but significance is spiritual. Success, secular, significance, spiritual. And I'll unpack that for you, too. You probably are already there. But he says success is human. It's finite. But significance is eternal. It's forever. And yes, we all hope that we'll be successful. And we all hope that our kids will be humanly successful. But more importantly is for us and for our children, those who follow after us, is to be significant, impacting others in a positive way. Mike Huckabee speaking to leadership, and I have a Republican and a Democrat. So my Republican is Mike Huckabee. So the true estimation of effective leadership is not how many people you lead, but how many people you serve. Or I might say it this way, it makes it a little more obvious. It's not about how many people serve you, but how many people you serve. That is the true estimation of effective leadership. Tom Carper, a Democrat from Delaware, when I got up with him to write the book, A Gathering of Eagles, the second edition, he was the governor of Delaware. And then he became the senator. He's still a sitting senator in Delaware. And it's probably one of the shortest statements, but the most practical statement that I can give you for wisdom for life. He just says it this way: find someone who needs help and then help them. Find someone who needs help and then help them. Our last guy, Ken Davis, out of the religion section of the book, a Christian humorist, a writer, a speaker. He would say, until a person has a purpose that they are willing to die for, they will never have a purpose that they would be willing to live for. You have to have a purpose that is so great in your life that you would be able to give up your life for the cause. And if you do not have a purpose that great, it may be, I would protect my family from harm. I don't know what it might be. I would fight for the nation, fight for freedom. So those are the 5 guys who started this whole deal. I just sat down and thought, along with the topic, why serve, and how many of you all, and this is not, how many people here were drafted, like actually drafted? So at least 5 guys were drafted at the time of the draft. Some people joined the military for a patriotic obligation. December 7th, 1941, there were a lot of people who were fulfilling patriotic obligations. They went to join the military after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Second group, another group, may have been just as patriotic, but they waited for whatever reason. They were drafted. Draft started in the Civil War all the way through Vietnam to the conclusion of Vietnam. Some people might look for training, a skill set. I would offer to you that the Air Force and the Navy probably offer better skill sets than the Army and the Marine Corps. But that's just my own observation. If I was telling my children, in fact, we were flying somewhere one time going into 2 different stories, and I not intended, but I'll hopefully wander back to what I'm talking about. We were in the jungles in the Amazon for a period of time. We had been truly in the jungle, living in the jungle for a period of time, and no real showers or anything, same uniform. And we came out, and the Air Force guy picked us up, and we went back in, flew into Panama, and it was the night before the invasion of Panama. And the Air Force guy at the desk, Senior Master Sergeant, said to the pilot, the Air Force pilot, the Army guys are going to have to go out and sleep in tents back in the jungle, And we were looking forward to getting a shower because the Air Force guys were going into billeting homes with showers. And the major said, no, these guys are going with me. He also knew that the conflict was going to start and he was going to get us out of there before it started. And anyways, he kept going on with that sergeant. Finally, the major just said, I'm taking you with me. You're staying tonight because if I have to leave, if we have to leave, then I know where you guys are and we'll pick you up and we'll go. And so I thanked the sergeant. I said, I jumped out of a lot of Air Force planes. I've never had anybody in the Air Force treat me that well. I said, I want to thank you for doing that because we've been in the jungle a long time and we'd like to take a shower and eat some regular food. Anyway, he said, let me explain this to you, Colonel. He said, I was a sergeant with the Army in infantry in Vietnam for 2 years. He said, I know what it's like to be in the jungle. And so anyway, he brought us out. Post-service educational benefits. I know my son-in-law, retired Marine Colonel, his oldest boy is getting ready to go to college, and he can even use some of his military benefits to help pay for his children's education. So there's educational benefits that continue. Service to nation, that's what I'm going to speak to in a moment. Travel, exotic travel all over the world. Adventure benefits, others. TNTC is just a pathology statement that's too numerous to count. There are just too many other possibilities to count. You all probably could add one or two more possibilities. Okay, the reason I served, my family came from England in 1625 to America. The first Coy to die in uniform was during the French and Indian Wars. His name was Corporal Richard Coy, and he died in Bloomfield, Massachusetts at Wheeler's Surprise with the Nipmuc Indians, and he was killed. After that came my great-grandfathers who fought with the Maryland militia. They left Massachusetts, moved to Maryland, fought in the Revolutionary War. First Sergeant John Coy, his son John Coy, Jr., private. Then they moved from Maryland to Kentucky, and my Uncle Daniel fought at the Battle of New Orleans with Jackson, General Jackson. He was wounded. He died on his way back to Kentucky. Then my family moved from Kentucky in 1855 to Missouri. My great-grandfather, James, and the paper on your right, the sort of yellowed paper, is his enlistment paper into the Union Army in 1864. James Coy fought with the Union Army. And my two brothers and I served 93 total years in the Army, the three of us together. So why did I join the military? My family had done it. I thought I owed that to my family and to the nation to also serve the nation. When I joined the military, I was directly commissioned a lieutenant in the medical corps. I finished medical school. My brothers came to me and said, don't just be a physician that wears a uniform. First, be a soldier, and then be the best physician that you can be. I'm not going to change. I'm going to, all often in military groups, the first picture I showed, and I talked about Vicky, there was a picture of Vicky and I, and we were in Italy, and what had happened was I had written books 1, 2, and 3 in the Eagle series, and a young man that I had mentored at West Point, he was in Columbia when I had mentored him, ended up at West Point, and he was in Italy with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and he walked in to the commander's office and saw those 3 books, The Gathering of Eagles, Valor, Prisoners of Hope, on the colonel's desk, and he didn't want to jump right into it, so he sort of walked around the issue and said, how do you like those books? And the colonel said, I love those books. So he said, I use quotes from those books all the time. Another drink of water, guys. love the books, use quotes. And so the young man said, well, I know the man that wrote those books. He's a friend of mine, mentored me. And the colonel said, well, would he come to Italy and speak to the 173rd Airborne Brigade for the Christmas celebration where everybody comes together? I said, I don't know, he might. I'll contact him. And so they contacted me, and so this is the rest of the story. Vicky is an only child, red-headed Icelander, Minnesota. Birthdays are important to women, maybe more so than women, it seems to me looking at it. And also, if you are the only child, I think birthdays are a pretty special event in the lives of the parent and the child. And I don't know how many times the military took me away on Vicky's birthday, but a number of times. And so I said, you know, I would love to come to Italy, but when I was with the military, it seemed like every other year I was somewhere else over Vicky's birthday. And you're asking me to come right during her birthday. And I'm going to have to say no. And the colonel said, well, what if we would pay your wife's fare to come with you to Italy? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe she would. And so that's how we got that one picture in Italy. One thing I did at that Airborne, 173rd Airborne Brigade, I called the cadence to about 1,000 paratroopers. I'm going to call the cadence now if I can remember it. So an airborne cadence is called C-130, rolling down the strip. Goes like this. And generally we would call a line, and then the airborne guys would follow with the line. You get to do this real early in the morning while you're running to the aircraft, getting ready to jump out. And it would go like this. C-130 rolling down the strip. Airborne daddy gonna take a little trip. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. Jump right out and count to 4. Note that main don't open wide. I've got a reserve by my side. If that one should fail me too, look out ground, I'm coming on through. That's stupid. You don't sing something like that going out to jump out of a plane. It just seemed, it always bothered me. Anyway, the rest of the cadence. Now if I die in a combat zone, box me up and ship me home. Tell my wife I done my best. Pin silver wings on my son's chest. Home, spouse, wife, son, children, legacy, capital words, bold type. I know of no other group of people who have a greater love of home, of spouse, of their legacy, their children, than those who are serving in harm's way. In fact, when we came back from the Gulf War, we were told that had we actually been killed with a weapon that was a bacterial agent or possibly chemical weapons, that they had contracted Saudi Arabia for 70,000 American soldiers to be buried in Saudi Arabia. And I can't say that I was offended, but I was upset when I found that out, because I thought, would not have wanted to have been buried in Saudi Arabia. I would have wanted to be back home. Anyway, I'm obligated to tell one airborne joke after going through my airborne history a little bit. People will often ask, I explain this story in Those Who Serve the Faith book, that last book in the series, in my 10 stories that I tell. People will often ask, if your main parachute doesn't open, what does it, look right up, count to 4, if that main don't open wide, I've got a reserve by my side. If your main parachute does not open, how long do you have to deploy your reserve parachute? Anybody know the answer to that? Don't shout it out if you do. Okay, the answer to that is how long do you have to deploy your reserve parachute? The answer is you have the rest of your life. Your life will be very short if you do not deploy it. It will be exciting momentarily, but you have to deploy your reserve parachute. Okay, Clarence Larson grew up in Kenyon, Minnesota. Bataan Death March. Talks in his story in Prisoners of Hope, and in the first book, and in a book he wrote himself, The Long March Home, how difficult, how horrible the Bataan Death March was. But he said, but if you wanted to find out something really terrible, it was the hell ship Yuso Maru. The hell ships that took American POWs back to work in slave labor in Japan. And he was a slave laborer in the coal mines of Japan. He would offer this advice to you today, one sentence again from these fellas. He would say, honor your flag. It spells freedom, yours and mine, and that freedom comes at a terrible cost. Colonel James Coy, also a POW, Army Infantry, 45th Infantry Division, Thunderbird Division, POW taken in Italy, transferred to Germany. He would offer this advice to you tonight. I'll often use it at Memorial Day activities. He just says it this way. Dying for freedom is not the worst thing that could happen. No. Dying for freedom and being forgotten, that's the worst thing that could happen. Willis Meyer was a fellow out of St. Louis. When I did the POW book, I wanted to get some central U.S., so I included about 10 Missouri POWs in the group, just so some of those guys would get together and we would sign books. He will offer this advice to you. As Americans, we have a sacred obligation to remember those who fought and died on foreign battlefields and did not return home. It's not just an obligation to remember, it's a sacred obligation to remember those who fought and died on foreign battlefields. Okay, I'm going into the segment where I'll have a few stories. I have a slide at the end where I have a question time. If you have a question that's really pressing anytime, you can ask anytime. I mean, just jump up and yell it out. But I have a time for that, and if there are no real questions, then I'll tell you maybe a couple of other stories, depending on the time that we have here. As I often say, and some of these stories are true. John McCain, like him or dislike him, still an American hero, POW, Silver Star, third highest award for valor in our nation's award for valor. Aviator, POW, Vietnam. He tells a story in the book, Prisoners of Hope, about a guy by the name of Mike Christian. Tells it this way. Mike Christian grew up in rural Alabama, outside of Selma, Alabama, on a farm. And Mike Christian grew up very poor, very, very poor. So poor, in fact, he had never had his own shoes to wear until he was in high school. He had never owned a pair of shoes until he got to high school. But he was a bright kid, apparently. He enlisted in the Navy, basically to see the world and to get an education, and did so well as an enlisted sailor that he was offered the opportunity to go to OCS, and went to OCS, Navy OCS, graduated, did so well, they offered him his choice. He chose naval aviation, became a naval aviator. He shot down over Vietnam. It's one of the mid-range POWs. There's early and late-range POWs, mid-range. 68, 69 period of time, shot down, endured the torture that was happening at that time. After a period of time, the early 70s, 69, 70, they start to move the POWs together in case there is an effort to liberate these POWs. They wanted them together, so many of them are at the Hanoi Hilton. Mike Christian is there. He's a naval aviator. McCain is a naval aviator. They're in the same section. Mike Christian created a little bamboo needle. And with that, he started collecting little pieces of red, white, and blue thread. And on the inside of his gray POW shirt, he sewed, embroidered, with a single bamboo needle and thread, an American flag. So when he would take off his shirt in the morning, he would hang it on the wall, and all of these sailors would come to attention, salute the flag, and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And then McCain says, one morning the North Vietnamese caught us. And they came in, they knocked a few people down, they grabbed the shirt off the wall, they looked around, they realized that Mike Christian does not have a shirt on, and know that this is his shirt. And so they take him outside the cell, close the door, and they begin to beat Mike Christian. For 2 hours they beat him until his eyes were swollen shut. He was bleeding from his ears. He had some fractured ribs. 2 hours later, after they're done beating him, they throw him back in the cell. And McCain said, we tried to help him, but there was really not much that we could do other than wipe the blood away. And we laid him down on the concrete bunk that he slept on. Early in the morning, McCain said, I woke up, and Mike Christian was gone. He wasn't there. And he said he was really, at that moment, just really afraid something bad had happened to Mike Christian. But as he looked around the cell, he looked in the corner of the large cell where all these men are sleeping. There's a light in the corner. Mike Christian is sitting in the corner, his eyes swollen shut. He has a new gray prison shirt, and he has red, white, and blue thread and his bamboo needle, and he is beginning to sew, embroider another American flag. And then McCain says, you have to realize, Mike Christian was not doing that for himself. He was doing that for us so we could state our allegiance to America each and every morning. Have to hold my lips just right. Alvar Platt, a favorite story, sort of a spiritual story, but I've never met anybody here who's known anyone named Alvar. So I'll ask the question. Anybody know anybody named Alvar? I'm batting 100 on this one. Just nobody ever knows anyone. Alvar Platt. The story he wrote was called May Day on a May Day, and he shot down on, I think it's May 1st, over the English Channel. They just bombed the submarine pins along the coast of France, and they're out over the English Channel. They're meeting headwinds, and then the German fighters come in, and his B-17 takes hits, and they're going to go down. In fact, they go down the English Channel. Half of the crew is lost. Alvar Platt is wounded. He's a waist gunner, and a waist gunner has these open doors, but what had happened on either side, the other waist gunner is killed by gunfire, and the waist gunner on the opposite side, the wings of the plane had folded back over the windows where the waist gunners would stand, and there was no way for him to get out of the aircraft. So aircraft are supposed to float for a while, but all the guys I've talked to have been shot down and say, no, that doesn't really happen. They just sink right off. Anyway, that's what happened in this case. The aircraft just sank, and the whole compartment that he's in is flooded. He's holding his breath, and he's thinking to himself, I wonder if this is the last breath that I will ever take. I'm going to take you all the way back to America. Same period. Back to America, California. His dad is a pastor. And every day it was his habit to go to the church to pray for Alvar, for the crew, for the U.S. Army Air Force, for the military, for the outcome of the war. I don't know what all he was praying for, but I know he was praying for Alvar every day. And he's driving to the church, and he's about 10 minutes out, and he feels like, I ought to just pull over right now and pray for Alvar. And then he said, that's silly. I'll be at the church in 8 minutes. Why pull over now? I'll do what I always do. Momentarily, it's driving. The thought comes to me, I should just pull over and pray for Alvar. No, I'm going to the church now. It's 7 minutes out. I'll be there in a few minutes. And then once again, it was just like right now. Pull over right now. Pray for Alvar. And so he did. He's a pastor. I hope he would. Those guys are supposed to pray. Pulls over, begins to pray for Alvar. Now, Alvar is repatriated a couple of years later. And Alvar and his father come together in California, and they're talking about that fateful day, and they realize that at the moment Alvar is holding his breath is the moment that his father feels this urge to pull over and pray. And then Alvar, sort of like a light bulb, said, I turned to my father and I said to him, Dad, thank you for listening to the urging of the Holy Spirit, because I could not have held my breath for the extra 7 minutes for you to get to church and pray for me. Robert Schumacher. POWs will talk about the 3 legs of a stool, and there are 3 F's, but this fellow gives you one more F, and it was hard for me to understand what he was saying initially, because your family is important to you if you're a POW. Your family is important. They want you to come home, and you want to get home to your family. Your family. The friends around you can save your life. If you're too sick to eat, they may feed you. They may protect you from being beaten. The friends around you are profoundly important to the POWs. And your faith is important. Now, I know many POWs, there are no atheists in foxholes. Some of the POWs would say never had a faith, but after being tortured for a period of time, it was pretty easy to wonder if there was a God, and if there was, did he know who I was? So family, friends, faith are important. And then this fella, now he wasn't an admiral at the time, 3-star admiral here, but when he told the story, he said, fun is important. And I thought, fun is important as a POW. And sort of take fun where you can get it. So I'm going to explain where he's coming from with this story. He was in the Hanoi Hilton, and the Americans were bombing Hanoi, the city. And the Americans were bombing so close to the Hanoi Hilton that the Americans were yelling at the aircraft that were flying by. So it was just as if we thought the pilots could hear us. So no, we knew they couldn't hear us, but they were yelling things like, you got to go ahead and bomb them. And I'm sure they were saying it a little more flowerfully, military expression, bomb them. Anyway, he said, and as I'm listening to that, he said, the windows are cracking and there are just booms and concussion. And then off in the distance, I hear noise. It says strange. It was a POW, and he was yelling. He kept repeating himself. And now I'm going to take an aside from that story and tell you the diet for the Vietnam POW was often a small bowl of rice and a piece of cabbage, a cabbage leaf, in a bowl of water with a few grains of rice. That might be all you would get for a day. A little piece of cabbage, some rice, and some water. And sometimes you would even get a little rice ball, I'm told by some of the guys. And then Schumacher says, he said, you just can't comprehend how sick you can get of cabbage if you have to eat cabbage 6 months out of the year. 1 cabbage leaf a day, 6 months out of the year. I had a POW from the Bataan Death March who told me all I had to eat as a POW was rice. He said, I have never eaten 1 grain of rice since I came back to America, and I never will. cabbage. You get pretty sick of cabbage. So Schumacher is listening, trying to discern what is being yelled, and then he realizes from the distance this POW is yelling to the planes bombing Hanoi, "Bomb the cabbage patches. Bomb the cabbage patches." Fun. I'm going to take a drink. I'll explain that slide. This is the question time. I have two more stories to potentially tell, or those are some of the events in my military career. I was a flight surgeon, Army flight surgeon. So participated in flight with a lot of UHD-1 Hueys. I went to jump school, the parachutes. Third picture, I went to the Israeli jump school. And then coming down off of the ropes out of helicopters, I went to air assault school. And then I was with the 3rd Group Army Special Forces. That's the liberation of Kuwait City. We went to the airport. I was set up a medical unit to treat Rangers, SEALs, and Green Berets. But we came under fire. And then the SEALs came up, picked us up, took us out, and let us off. And then the Navy guys always kind of clap at that. Yay, the SEALs saved the Army Special Forces bacon on that one. And then I say, but the problem was, it was night, and they kept running. They got lost inside the city. And every corner we turned, everybody thought, we're going to get blown away. But anyway, we made it out. So we have about 15 minutes. I'm going to tell at least one story at the end. I may give you Desmond Doss's advice, but any questions or any thoughts or about any of this tonight? Yes?
Thank you very much for your service, and your stories are amazing.
I was blessed, and again, people said, did you always want to write a book? And I said, no, I wasn't really a particularly good student. In fact, I wrote stories for my children every night for a year, and one of the stories I wrote was just stating that I was academically challenged in high school. I loved athletics, and you had to be on the M honor roll, C honor roll. So I did that, but I never really studied too hard. I said that I was academically challenged, and I periodically, in fact, failed to meet my lofty goals of academic mediocrity. Now, I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but I didn't intend to write books. It just sort of came my way. I was blessed to do it, and I was blessed to serve. And my family, I'm glad for the tradition that they have handed down to me that allowed me to serve. I'm so proud of my brothers and all of those who served, have been decorated for heroism and valor, and I was just there. Okay, thank you very much. And again, thank you for all of you who have served. Any other thoughts or questions? Questions on the Eagle series? Yes?
Cabbage is one of the most nutritious foods.
I'm sorry?
Cabbage is one of the most nutritious foods.
Cabbage is one of the most nutritious foods, so don't yell, bomb the cabbage patches. Yes. But I also recommend don't eat it every day for 6 months at a... Any other thoughts? Okay. Yeah, thanks. And friends, I talked about the mother of a resident that I had, mother-in-law. We have some friends who came all the way from Wisconsin. Not really. They're from Wisconsin. Tank and his wife Susan from Wisconsin, but they now live here, and they blessed us with lunch today and came tonight.
Would you please tell us about the X-ray issue in your life? And how it
It makes it sound like I'm smart again, but again, I've already told you I was academically challenged. I was asked by the Special Forces to create an X-ray machine because my training had been in emergency medicine and then in radiology, an X-ray machine that could be carried far forward in combats by special forces units, guys who don't have hospitals, but they do have medics, highly trained medics, and they have one physician and a PA, physician assistant asset, but they don't have X-ray equipment. So it's not like I got out my erector set and built an X-ray machine, but I took podiatry units, dental units, and veterinary units. We changed the speeds on those machines and the length of time it would make an exposure. They would be about 28 pounds. They referred to them as Coy's throwaway X-ray machines. And when you have processing, wet film processing, you have hundreds of pounds of equipment. So we used a little box and we just rolled Polaroid X-ray film through it with a gel and peeled off the plates, and we use them in Central and South America. The technology is so far above that now, but again, yeah, I was involved in that, and it brought me a lot of prestige in the military. I mean, people thought that I actually knew what I was doing. I wrote a lot of articles about it and did research on it. In fact, Gina may have been involved in some of those articles with that, but yeah, it sounds like I did more than I did, and God blessed me with allowing me to do it, but it wasn't that I was the sharpest pencil in the box or something like that. It just, I was there once again. Any other questions? If not, I'll go to a couple of stories. Again, one of my favorite guys, Desmond Doss. And we'll be at 8 o'clock in 10 minutes, so I'm doing great. Desmond Doss, the fellow that's not the skinny guy there in the white shirt, is Desmond, and I'm the taller guy and a little heavier than him. But on the Maida Escarpment, Battle of Okinawa, Desmond Doss went up with his company, and that company is attacked by the Japanese, and they take a large number of casualties. And the escarpment is just a bluff. They're up on top of a bluff. And they take a number of American wounded, and the guys who are not wounded start scrambling down the cargo nets. And Desmond is up there. And so Desmond stays. He is not wounded. He stays with the men that are wounded and starts to lower them on a rope, the rope that's tied around my chest and my upper legs. He showed me how he tied that rope. He would let them down. He would wind it around a tree and just let these men down, one at a time. And they kept yelling at him, come down, come down. And he said, I just kept praying. If I can get one more man that would be wounded, it would be worth it to be wounded or even killed if I can get just one more man down. And when he got down, he got everybody off the top of the escarpment over a period of time. They said, you saved the lives of 100 men. And Desmond Doss said, no way, I could not have done that. Now when he was going through basic training, nobody liked him. Conscientious objector, wouldn't touch a gun. I mean, you can just imagine. The guy wouldn't carry a gun. Would you want him to protect you? So he gets down and says, no way I could have done that. I think maybe I could have saved the lives of 50 men. So his Medal of Honor citation says that what they do is they compromised. The unit said 100, Desmond said 50, so they called it 75. You saved 75 men. Again, his advice for life. If you miss heaven, you've missed everything. Last story. I call this one Doc. We're getting ready to go forward into the invasion to liberate Kuwait City. And we're going to cross Marine lines, and we're going to go into active combat. And as that unit was getting ready to leave, the ground unit, we're going to fly people in at different increments so everybody in the medical section wouldn't be shot down at one time and all lost. And therefore, but they needed somebody to go on the ground convoy. The first people in, and I tell people the reason I was selected because I was a colonel, and a colonel is absolutely worthless to everybody. Anyway, I was a colonel, and I was selected to go forward. And I ran up to the ambulance just as it's pulling out, and I tapped on the back of the ambulance door, and this great big 6'5" kind of a guy, medic, his name was D, opens the door and says, "What do you want, Colonel?" I said, "I'm going with you. No physician asset. They want a physician on the ground convoy." And as I look at the back of the ambulance, it's absolutely packed full. I'm thinking, if we take a casualty, where are we going to put our casualties? Anyway, we're driving down the road, and after a period of time, I'm sitting up front, and I'm a little bit thirsty. I have a canteen full of water, but I didn't want to use all my canteen of water. I thought, well, D, Special Forces medic, previously an Army Ranger, good soldier, he'll have water in the back of the ambulance. So I turned around to the door that closes the back of the ambulance, and I tapped, and D opened it. "What do you want, Doc?" And I said, "Well, D, I would like some water. Do you have a liter of water back there, any bottled water?" Feeling like the whole ambulance is full. He's got water, he's got food, he's got medical supplies. And D starts picking stuff up and throwing around only the way a 6'5" guy can do that. And, you hear stuff banging around the ambulance. And then I hear this sort of plaintive response from the back of the ambulance. The doc, I said, "We don't have any water back here." And, well, gee whiz, what's back there? And no water. And he said, "But there is a liter bottle underneath the driver's seat. It's in a brown paper bag if you want that." And I reached under the driver's seat and pulled out this liter of bottled water, twice this size, and in a paper bag. And I pulled the paper bag back, and the water was brown. And worse than that, it had mucus floating on the top and tobacco leaves. And then I thought, I'm just not that thirsty. So we're driving on now a little bit later. We're getting ready to cross Marine lines, and I'm getting hungry. And so, again, I tap on the door, and D comes over. "What do you want, Doc?" So, "Well, D, I'm a little bit hungry. Do you have any MREs? Anybody know what MRE stands for? Meals ready to eat is what the Army calls it. But if you've eaten them for a while, you call them meals rarely eaten. Because after a while, you get pretty sick of those MREs. And he throws stuff around again, and finally this plaintive response, "Doc, we don't have any MREs back here, but we're going to be at Marine lines. We're going to stop, we're going to get fuel, and then we're going to go into Iraqi territory." We get MREs and water there. So we come in Marine lines, we get our MREs, we get our water, and then we take off. Now we've got a bulldozer with a wide blade that has cut a path ahead of us to make sure that everything is okay. But only in the morning, as I'm looking out the window of the ambulance, I realize that there are all these metal discs on either side of the ambulance, just a couple of feet away from the ambulance. And I realize we are in an active minefield. We're in a minefield. And I look at the floor, and there are no sandbags on the floor. And the colonel, the 06, the full colonel, commander of the 3rd Special Forces Group, said all vehicles going forward will have sandbags in the floor. So if you take a hit, maybe you'll not lose personnel. You may lose the equipment, but maybe personnel will be spared. And so I'm a little concerned. And once again, "Doc, what do you want?" I said, "Well, D, I'm looking out the window, and we're in an active minefield. There are mines littered along the side of this van." I said, "We were told that we were supposed to have sandbags on the floor of these vehicles, and I don't see any. I'm a little bit concerned. In fact, that's my seat. You can see I'm sitting, maybe you can't see it, but I'm sitting on a flak vest, and my M16's there, and my hat. I'm sitting on a flak vest in case we hit a mine, and metal comes up through the bottom, that I won't be sitting on metal, hot metal." Anyway, D, I don't see sandbags. You have any sandbags in the back? And finally, just this really plaintive response, "Doc, quit worrying. He said, I have loaded this ambulance so full of AT-4 rockets, bazookas. I've loaded this so full of rockets that if we take one hit, we're all out of here anyway. Thank you for allowing me to be with you this evening. If you are interested in any of the books or stories or how to get up with us or participate in sending books to our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, Vicki and I will be back in the back.